Hi, welcome back to our series all about doing fix differently. In this episode, I want to start thinking a little bit about what a more automated vision of a fix pipeline might actually be. Now, pipeline is a relatively new term. It comes from the idea of continuous integration and continuous deployment that people are talking about more and more in the development and QA world. So what is it? Let's talk about that existing structure first. So the idea of continual integration is the idea of writing a piece of code which has some embedded unit tests, integration tests within it. When you check in the code, then actually those tests get automatically run and you get your results back. If the tests are automatically run, then it can automatically trigger the next stage in the process. That stage may be, let's say, a merge process into perhaps the master branch or some other type of branch. Once the merge process happens, then you can rerun the test again, make sure that everything is still working acceptable. And then it might actually then trigger a automated build process. So things like, Docker containers and things like that, it can spin up various different Docker containers, inject your code into those Docker containers, and get them ready for production deployment. Now, this continual integration, continuous deployment mode isn't actually unique to financial services at all. It's the things that the guys in Silicon Valley have been doing for a very long time. It's the reason why they managed to ship so quickly new features and new code. So it's something that a lot of people are talking about right now. Now, when you think about that type of pipeline, how will we ever put that into a fixed context, which is a far more slow-moving deal? Well, let's think about the requirements that we actually need for that. So first of all, when I ship my code, I probably need to have an auto generation of some configuration files. So if you're using an engine like QuickFix, for example, you might want to auto-generate the configuration files for your QuickFix, perhaps a dictionary based on any API changes that you've just made. Then I'd need to go through the generation of, let's call them exploratory tests. Exploratory tests might be unit tests against various different pieces of the API. So we need to somehow understand how the API has changed and build unit tests in order to be able to test that functionality. Normally, firms then would move through some sort of level of regression testing. So this is the equivalent of integration testing in other software arenas. So regression testing is typically taking some key customers or some key activities that normally happen, replaying production data through a test environment and making sure that all of the outcomes actually match up. Sometimes people use tools like Verifix to try to automate this step today. There's also the problem of customer transforms. So if you're a bank or you're a trading venue who allows customers to transform their API on your side, then you need to test all of that stuff and make sure that none of those transformations are broken. Once all of that is done, then there's the automated deployment step. Now, this is something that people have done to a certain degree today. They've done various different deployment scripts to allow them to push various different pieces of code back out. Here, though, in the fix world, we need to think about things like deploying quick fix config files and rolling those back if anything goes wrong with that particular production deployment. Now, the one kind of quirk in all of this thing is, well, what about certification or recertification? And the reality is that we know today that very few firms actually go through the process of recertifying customers for each individual release. They'll look at an individual change and say, well, is this backwardly compatible, yes or no? And if it really isn't backwardly compatible, then into that list of activities there, you would insert a customer regression testing cycle, essentially, which is normally quite a long and manual process. Other people will try to avoid that as much as they can by making their APIs always backward compatible. And if that's your approach, then that's absolutely fine. It just does mean that you need extra testing then to make sure that that is true and that the new API is actually backward compatible with your version. So if you think about what this new fix automated pipeline might actually look like, there's a number of steps that people would need to go through in order to actually be able to deploy one of these things. And they kind of go to the things that developers they speak to the things that developers need to do in the traditional coding sense. First of all, you need automated tests, and that's actually something that we've all kind of got in the habit of, shortcutting. Perhaps there aren't automated tests for absolutely everything that you have today. And that crucially for this particular circumstance, we're talking about automated tests against an API, which actually means that your developers really need to document your API. Lots of people think that I'm obsessed with writing your specs and writing your specs in an electronic format. The reality is it's for precisely this reason that I continue to keep talking about electronic specs and the need for accurate electronic specs. If you have an accurate electronic document, then it's much easier then for you to create automated integration tests to push into a fixed pipeline like this. If your developers aren't capturing the API changes that they're actually making, then you kind of don't really have any hope of implementing any sort of automation here. So it's really, really critical right up front that you capture the API documents. You also need to understand what your customers do. So remember that step where I said, well, we want to test out certain key customers and exactly how they are going to be impacted by a particular change. That means that somewhere you need to have configurations which talk about how your customers actually behave. What capabilities are they capable of? If they're sending in agreed transformations or changes to your API, what are they? Those types of configurations shouldn't really be sitting in XML files scattered somewhere in your production system. They need to be brought much closer into the development testing cycle to allow it to be embedded into this automated pipeline and to make sure that you haven't broken anything along the route. Okay. And then finally, of course, you've got conformance, that big wildcard that I just talked about. It's really, really important that you either validate that your API release is backwardly compatible 100%. You can do that with all the strategies that I talked about. Or if it isn't, then you need to understand which customers need to recertify and exactly what they need to recertify for. The key to that particular task is minimizing the amount of work for you, minimizing the amount of work for your customers. You don't want to go and ask people to recertify absolutely everything unless it's really, really required. And again, we come back to the idea of understanding more and more about what your customers are capable of, understanding all of their quirks and their differences and the agreed deviations to your API. The better you have all of that documented up front, captured electronically, the better it is to identify, or the easier it is to identify exactly what they need to regression test. And therefore, the shorter that regression cycle can actually be. Add into that some sort of workflow tool or management tool which automates the process of conformance, and suddenly you can start shrinking that API release timeline down. So that's it. That's a high-level understanding of what a automated fix pipeline might actually look like in the future. There's a lot of work to get there. It's very, very rare that we ever talk to any firm who's achieved a significant level of API automation. But the key blockers are capturing your specification, capturing the transformation up front, really understanding what your customers are doing. Those are the three key things that everybody needs in order to be able to move to this more automated future. All of those three things are actually accommodated by electronic specs, which is why we're always so focused on electronic specs here at FixSpec. So I hope that helps. If you have got some good track record internally of building an API pipeline, if you've managed to capture some of these things, please let us know. Leave a comment below and engage in a dialogue. We'd love to hear about people's experiences. If you've found some other way of implementing continuous integration or deployment in your firm, again, please drop us a line. Let us know how you're getting on. Hope that's very useful for you. Hope it's triggered some thoughts in your mind about how to do things better. Tune in next time for doing Fix Differently.